Well, the History Shelf today is thrilled to have our guest. This is retired Colonel Keith Nightingale. Um, Previously on this channel, I have read and reviewed books from Colonel Nightingale. And in fact, I have my stack here. We've got Phoenix Rising, Just Another Day in Vietnam, um, A Soldier Looks Back. I mean,
And
you
don't
name
forget
it.
this.
And then this one, and that's the purpose of today. That is the purpose of today's video. We are recognizing the 80th anniversary this month in June of D-Day. And Keith's latest book, Colonel Nightingale's latest book, is The Human Face of D-Day, Walking the Battlefields of Normandy, Essays, Reflections, and Conversations with Veterans of the Longest Day. So thank you for joining us here on the History Shelf today, Keith, to talk about your book and your experience just being a part of the commemoration of the anniversary in Normandy. So just for our viewers who are not familiar with you, could you give us a little bit of a description of just your background and a little bit about you?
Well, I joined the Army, interestingly enough, on 6 June 1965. I spent 29 years and change. Then I went to work for a corporation doing sort of the same things I was doing in the Army, but getting paid better. Uh, my virtually all of my military experience is in airborne, ranger, and special operations. And in regard to Normandy, I was in the 509th Airborne in Vicenza, Italy, in the late 70s, and I made my first trip to Normandy in 1977. And since I retired in 1993, I've been going back every year since.
Wow. Wow.
You know, the impetus for my book and what I've done every year is, in the beginning, I had no clue what was actually happening to me. But I was walking the beaches at Omaha with my beret on and my uniform with a lieutenant, and we were just doing our history thing. We'd never been there before and wanted to look at it. And all of a sudden, these veterans came up, like we were a magnet. And they started, are you in the Army? Are you airborne? What are you doing here? And I say, well, we're here to study history. And then they just start opening up. Well, I was here in the first wave, and I was over there by that rock, and, all this other stuff.
Wow.
And we were just inundated with these vets anxious to talk to us, tell us their story.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd be walking along the beach talking to ex-PFC Schmuckatelli, and he'd have his family around him, but they were kind of just listening to him talking to us. And when it was all over, one of them would come up to us and say, I never knew that. I've never heard as much about what he did until today. Thank you.
Wow.
I'm kind of thinking to myself, this is kind of special.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I went back a year later, and I started taking notes just out of personal curiosity. And then eventually, when I became the commander of the 2nd 505 and the 82nd, this was in late 1983.
Mm-hmm.
I suggested to General Lindsay, the commanding general of the 82nd, wouldn't it be a great idea if we took the 82nd back to Normandy for the first time since World War II? Well, he thought that was a great idea.
Yeah.
And this was before the 60th became a big deal with Reagan and all that. So we kind of got in on the ground floor, and he introduced me to General Gavin. And General Gavin was really fired up about this.
He was on the cover, correct?
That's him talking to us on the 40th anniversary at Lafayette Bridge. And he organized 12 busloads of veterans to meet us when we jumped into St. Mary Glees. And they were all in their old airborne hats and their parachute uniforms of World War II, most of which still fit.
Mhm.
And he had them organized so that all of the originals were at each of the battle sites that we were going to. And this was in conjunction with the Brits, who did the same thing with their objectives: Pegasus Bridge, Merville Battery, Aramash. And it was just incredible. I mean, we go to a location and we knew the general history, kind of the gross facts, if you would. But these guys, what they gave us was actually the human aspects of it. The beauty of Normandy is that it's basically untouched. You don't have to visualize something under a parking lot like Antietam.
Okay.
The ground is all there. In many cases, the positions are still there.
Wow.
Then you have the original walk you through. I mean, Dick Winters at Breckert Manor. I mean, what's that worth?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and all their, his PFCs giving us a slightly different view of the action. You would go to these sites and you might have 12 or 15 vets ranging from a relatively senior officer, junior leader, down to a PFC. And they would just tell you exactly what they saw. And in many cases, it was kind of conflictive with other comments at the same location. But what you were getting when you listened to the whole thing was the whole truth. And you see it through the lens of those individual soldiers at that moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a unique experience. And over time, I clearly felt a sense of responsibility to remember what they said
Yeah.
and to pass it on. And so every year now, I give this terrain walks to the active duty troops that are there for the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly as I remember the originals gave it to me. And it imparts a different tone. It's not like a guide just giving you the facts at a location. I try to get in what Gavin told me, grabbing a guy by the equipment straps and say, "You got to go now,"
Oh, wow.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's, as long as I can do it, I'm going to do it. I think I take it on as a responsibility. That's a long answer to your first question.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, because that was one of the questions was, how you got started in doing this and, wanting to tell this story and to capture those memories right before, you know, um, people pass on. But I loved your description early on in the book where you're flying back to jump in for that 40th anniversary. And I was really moved by the reaction of the people on the ground from Normandy. It kind of leads into, I just was hoping you could expand on this. And you did later on in the book as well, towards the end, you talked about it again, that, Normandy is not just a place and June 6th is not just a date, and that for people in Normandy, um, the invasion is always a current event. So they were just so, when you landed, it was a hard landing and they just picked you up and they were just greeting you. Is that just every year, that love for the
Yeah, it's
locals?
really quite incredible. I was shocked. In 1977, I went to St. Mary Glees because, I was studying the 82nd and I was curious. So I show up and I got in my uniform, a lieutenant myself. Well, the whole town just glommed on us. It was incredible. They had very few veterans show up. So any uniform person was just treated like a king.
Wow.
And what I found was that, yes, Normandy is current events with these people, and they're incredibly thankful. One of the things that just blows the mind of the troops every year is how incredibly grateful the locals are. I mean, it's multi-generational thing.
Mm,
You might expect that from kind of the first generation that was there on Liberation Day,
yeah.
but to get it 4 generations later is quite unique. And as I mentioned in the book, it's mandatory studies in both elementary and high school. And one of the things that I found most touching was the first time I went to Omaha Beach, the cemetery at Omaha.
Mhm.
And there's all these school kids all over the place. Adolescents, in elementary school, and in some cases high school. And I asked one of the guides, what's the deal here?
Mhm.
And he said, well, in the French school system at Normandy, every child has to go to the cemetery here and pick a name and study that name, his location, his dates, and all that, and build a story of what happened to that troop. I just found that
Wow.
incredibly moving, in addition to a real statement as to how they really feel. And they do it the same thing today. You'll
Mhm.
see all the kids at the cemetery, and they're looking at a particular name, and they're telling the story of that particular soldier.
Yes. That is so unusual and so heartening. To know that somewhere in France there's people who
They
just
care
they care and they
much more
remember.
than we do.
Well, exactly. Yes. They care and it means a lot to them about the person, all the, hundreds and thousands of men who jumped and waded ashore and lost their lives in many cases. So thank you for sharing that because I think that's really, really revealing about, wow, that still exists somewhere in the world, that type of
It's
gratitude.
every year it's moving. You can't walk the cemetery and see the kids there and not be moved.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And um in your book is just a wealth of different stories in can you explain just like the structure of the book a little bit? Because as I was reading it, I know you kind of go into you kind of start off with the where, the when, the how, and then we go into preparation and training, and that's where there's a lot of detail here. So military military fans are going to love this. We've got a wealth of maps of the batteries that were put, facing the troops and everything else. But let's talk about for the uninitiated again. When people think of D-Day, they think of the soldiers storming the beach, but there was a lot more involved than that. If you want to, just expand on that topic as far as the airborne operations, the Pathfinders, everything that had to be kind of like scoped out in advance. I mean, we could be here all day for sure. This is a big topic, but just some of your reflections on that.
Well, first of all, it was the largest single day operation in our civilization. It was also arguably in World War II the most important. If we didn't get a foothold in France and move on to defeat the German army, then the whole face of Europe would be dramatically different today. But to do that, it required an incredible massing of capability, if you would, remembering that we have a major war in the Pacific and we have a not too minor war in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic routing between New York and England for supplies. Putting this thing together, it required a huge amalgamation of, call it things. Let's start with that. And a real testament to the industrial base of the United States. At 4:30 in the morning on the 6th of June in the Bay of the Seine, there were 140,000 troops afloat in Higgins boats. Higgins boat has about 25 people in it, so do the math. There were over 10,000 aircraft associated with it, 4,500 commissioned ships. You know how many ships there are now in the United States Navy? About 230. So, you get the picture.
Yeah.
And they did all of this without any computers, They did it all literally with pencils, paper, and mimeograph machines.
Amazing.
And you go into the original operations orders and directives, you get down to the nitty gritty on a single Higgins boat going to a single point on the beach. It has every person's position outlined in that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so many anti-tank guys, so many mine detectors, so many assault forces. Each one of those Higgins boats was accounted for to the nth degree. You take it all the way back. Eisenhower had about 1 million men in England ready to go to France, but they couldn't go anywhere until that 140,000 people went ashore.
Yeah.
And it was just an incredible story of how they were able to do that organizationally, and also using, above all else, delegation of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Eisenhower understood at the very beginning there was no way he could figure out how to get to the 5 beaches. It was up to people well below him to figure that out and pass it back up.
Mm-hmm.
They were making constant adjustments based on intelligence, you know, from when they started it 8 months before their serious planning down to essentially the day before the assault. They were making changes. And it was all incredibly efficient. You know, when you look at that mass today, you wonder how we could ever do it. You know, just considering how kind of bare their technology was at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's kind of in a nutshell the mass required to invade France, their ability to divide it up into thousands of little eaches, and then all coalesce it together at a single point. One of the things that every vet told me, starting with the airborne, is that when they took off, it was still light. It was the late evening of 6 June, like early evening, like 11 o'clock at night. It was still light on the English Channel.
Yeah.
And the troops, the doors were all open on the aircraft. And the troop would look out and he would see for the first time this mass of people going toward France. You know, it left an indelible memory with them, you know, looking out and seeing this huge armada.
Mm-hmm.
Colonel Vandervoort, commander of the 2nd of the 05, was jumpmaster standing in the door. And he said in his mind, he could have walked from Britain to France and never stepped on water for all the ships that he saw.
Wow.
Marcucci, this guy that I met who was in the first wave in the 1st Division, said for the first time he got up when it got to be daylight. They had already in their boats moving toward the shore. And for the first time, it came semi-daylight. And he said he couldn't see anything for all the ships. It was amazing. You know, he just had no idea that the Navy had that many ships. And, you know, he was this little bobbing part of it. And it said it gave him a huge sense of relief. You know, he knew that we were going to win. You know, there's no way the Germans could defeat a force of this magnitude. You know, just an incredible psychological effect on everybody that saw what was going on that day.
Right. Right. It kind of like just your description made me think of the Greeks sailing onto the beaches of Troy, right? Just wondering, you kind of see those cycles in history, but the
No
massive
Greek fire.
or the yes, the Greek fire. So yeah, it just the imagery. I wish I could have seen that. I can see where that would be an indelible memory. But what your experience as a soldier and as a commander, what do you think, what would it have been like for a soldier entering that beach? Like, I mean, are there things that you're focused on as far as, in your company?
Well, I can tell you what you would think about before you got there.
Okay, fair enough.
Everything changes when you land. As the Army historian SLA Marshall said, all combat is small unit. So you have this 140,000 people afloat, masses of men, masses of material, lots of gunfire, planes, etc. It all boils down to 2 or 3 guys landing at a spot and taking charge of their own piece of the ground and either doing or not doing what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
No plan lasts beyond the first round. So when they landed, everything was 140,000 individuals on the beach. I can tell you what the veterans at, say, Omaha told me when they landed. You know, they knew what they were supposed to do. They studied the imagery to death. They knew their objectives to the nth degree. But when they got there, everything changed. The enemy gets to vote. You know, in this case,
Yeah.
the Germans had this tremendous defense. And every vet I talked to made 3 points to me about Omaha Beach. The first was the total gross sensory deprivation. They couldn't see anything beyond a very small focus of their eyes, and they couldn't hear anything for the huge noise that was going on. It was just a blanket of noise and flashes and blasts going off. Said, you know, you see the movies of these guys running across the beach, never happened. We got as close to sand as we could get and just crawled up with the water line trying to find something to hide behind.
Oh, Lord.
So, you know, that was the first point that they made. The second was the appearance, as you read it in the book, about the destroyers. The destroyers made their own decision contrary to orders. They moved in very close, shoal waters, and just began firing at the cliff top. And the guys on the beach told me that for the first time, they actually felt they were being supported. And it lifted fire and allowed them to begin doing some movements. The third thing is, as they finally eventually started walking up the side of the cliffs and getting to the top, around 11:30 or 12, one of them would stop maybe halfway up and he'd look back to where he had been for the first time. And this is unique to every one of those guys I talked to. They all had the same experience. They'd be walking up, they'd stop to take a breath, they'd look back and they see this huge carnage on the beach. All the trucks burning, the bulldozers, the blown up tanks, the Higgins boats, just a complete junkyard with all this stuff going on. And they said they could see as the tide was coming up, as far as the eye could see on the beach at the waterline was just this long line of soldiers, shoulder to shoulder. They were dead, just going in with the tide. And beyond them, they could see in the sun a long pink stripe coming out from the back. And it wasn't unique to a single soldier. I mean, virtually every troop that climbed those cliffs gave me the same story.
Wow. Wow.
It's a unique place.
I would imagine just to be there would really, like you said, blow your mind to consider the amount of sacrifice that happened in that one section of the coastline. Was there anything that didn't go right or according to plan? Just curious.
Virtually everything.
Virtually everything, because you're saying this massive 140,000 people, what a logistical, just feat this was. But once you're enacting the plan, like you said, it's small unit fighting. You're focused on just that narrow vision. The sound is, just prohibitive of any type of, clear communication. So yeah, how did this work if so many things did go wrong?
Well, each beach was unique. The 3 British beaches and the 2 US beaches, each of them had a different experience.
Mhm.
Juneau, the Canadian beach, had almost as close to an Omaha-like situation as possible, but they finally broke through. Utah was basically a piece of cake. Only, I think, 94 people were killed there.
Wow.
Omaha was totally different. And to answer your question, how did we pull it off? I like to use the expression that it was ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Little groups of onesies and twosies would decide they had to get up and do something, and they did it. Incredible leadership examples. General Wyman in the 1st Division area, General Cota in the 29th Division area, rallying the troops. Cota personally carrying a PFC up the cliff top by the Verville Draw about 9:30 in the morning. Probably the first U.S. soldier on top. Followed closely by Lieutenant Monteith and the 1st Division guys at the extreme left of the beach itself. Land 500 yards of where they were supposed to. They knew their objective perfectly. However, they didn't land anywhere near it. They landed 500 yards further to the east. And they didn't let it blow their minds. They just said, okay, we're here. We got to go kill Germans. And they went up, took advantage of the terrain, and started clearing out the Germans. And it was this story all along the beach. Little groups of people doing rather extraordinary things against all they had been trained to do before. Mislanded troops everywhere. Everybody half drowned. Everybody was seasick.
Yeah.
It's just all the worst things that could have happened to a troop happened. And they picked themselves up and they just did it. That's the only way I can explain it, was that these individuals did unique things, and in concert, they accomplished what the overall objective was. Nowhere near the way it was planned, but the way it actually occurred.
Wow. I mean, it speaks to the fighting spirit of the American soldier, for sure. And I mean, do you think that it does, or that the fact that
Oh,
Omaha,
absolutely.
yeah, that they just didn't give up? They're like, we got to get through here. There's no
They
turning
all
back.
understood the necessity to get to the top of the cliffs.
Yeah.
They didn't allow the fact that they weren't where they were supposed to be, or they weren't with the people that they were supposed to be,
Right.
to seriously affect them.
Okay.
They just picked it up and started moving and did what they were trained to do. Every troop I talked to said, once the battle starts, your training kicks in. They understood the cliff was in front of them. They had to get to the cliff and get up and get over.
Yep.
So they individually figured out how to do that, sometimes with leadership, sometimes without. But they were universally aware of where they had to ultimately be, and each went about doing it in their own way.
Right.
It's a real testament, not only to the training of the soldiers, but also to the spirit and the attitude of the troops. I mean, they all knew that they were part of something larger than themselves. They understood they were part of something really important. And they all expressed pride in being part of that, regardless of how disastrous their personal situation was on D-Day. They took a lot of pride in being part of it and actually doing something to make the overall goal be achieved.
Absolutely. And it's important that we just remember their sacrifice. And that's why I think the timing of your book is perfect too, with the 80th, anniversary coming up, and you're heading out in a few days, right?
I'm leaving on Monday.
on Monday?
I've got a couple hundred troops, and I'm going to do staff rides throughout the period, which ends with a mass tactical jump on the 9th at St. Mary Glees.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay.
We
Jeez.
got the president speaking on the 6th of June at the cemetery. And then we have the 82nd, the Ranger Regiment, the French Foreign Legion, I think a German airborne battalion, and the French Sincere Cadets, all jumping on the 9th at Iron Mike, which is the memorial area at St. Mary Glees. And that's going to be the culmination of the festivities this year. But it is a biggie.
It's a biggie, and I would imagine there's going to be a lot of cameras there. And I'll be looking on all the news channels, right? I'm hoping someone's covering this event.
Somebody will, I guarantee you.
Yeah, I'll turn on C-SPAN or something.
Even if you got to watch French television,
Or
I guarantee you the cameras will be there.
The best I can do from out here in Colorado is I got my about my 80th anniversary D-Day T-shirt. You know, it's got the big icons on the stuff on the back, and so I'm just doing what I can here to you know, remind
We
people
love
of,
all the support we could get.
man, I tell you what, I love you guys. I love all the guys who have come before. You know, I've said this on this channel. I'm just a huge supporter of our military and what, you know, the sacrifices men and women have made in uniform. I am a vet, and so this stuff really means a lot to me, and I just, you know, I'm just really moved by everything that I've read and seen about D-Day and just all of the sacrifices that our men and women have made over the years. It just means, it means so much, and I just really want this new generation to understand that there's something here that to be proud of. And I guess that
you can you should imagine this. The week of 1 through 9, well, the week and a half between 1 and 9 June, there will be more American flags flying in Normandy than anywhere else in the United States.
wow. I'll just let that go without comment, because that says everything right there.
Exactly.
Well, do you have some more time though to talk about
Sure.
more details? I might need to send you another link here in a minute, but just so we can get another 30 minutes. But I guess since we're on this topic, it was one of my final questions for you, but let's just talk about this now. In your experience and in your life experience, and then also with the just honoring and your what do you call them, staff rides in Normandy?
Right.
Okay. And you see how in France they just love the American GI, they love the, you know, the Brits, the Canadians, everyone who was a part of that. What does D-Day and you know, the eventual liberation of France should mean to a younger generation in our country? What lesson do you think? Because I honestly think not all of them, but I think we've lost something. And I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble here on this one, but I feel like we've lost something about honoring a sense of sacrifice and serving your country. And I think people just kind of poo-poo it as something déclassé, you know, that's old news. Well, it's not, it's really not, because there's still bad guys in this world. I mean, just look around you. So what kind of lessons can this generation, if they would just take a moment to consider and reflect what Normandy meant?
You asked me what the meaning of Normandy is in terms of call it our nation, our civilization, whatever. And I mentioned that it's really kind of the repository of the spirit of what we're all about. You know, we went in there without any avarice, no desire for land. We paid in blood so the French were free, and we defeated the Germans. Well, what does that mean? It means that our value system as a civilization occasionally requires us to spend blood to preserve what we know is important. And perhaps the uh, most meaningful model of that was an experience I had as a next of kin officer. Between my tours in Vietnam, one of the things I had to do was deliver the telegrams to the families of deceased loved ones. And I got the phone call from the casualty control people and the telegram to bring to the family. And it was a family I was familiar with. The husband had recently divorced his wife and had married one of his students, a certain degree of notoriety. I didn't know anything about the circumstances of the wife herself until I came to the door. It's myself and the chaplain. We're all in our Class A uniforms. They know exactly why you're there. So I knock on the door, and it was this kind of screen door. And this woman comes out, and it wasn't the wife. It was a daughter who was obviously extremely challenged. And the mother came in right behind her. And she opened the door. And I said, I regret to inform you. And the daughter was kind of hanging on the woman. I mean, she was clearly in need of constant help. I gave her the telegram. She looked at me and she says, well, that's the price we have to pay for what we are. She closed the door. I mean, thinking of it 40 years later, it still kind of blows my mind. But I think it's representative of what we're talking about.
Well, I can't think of anything more. Wow.
She understood better than most of us what it was all about.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I don't have anything to say to that because
There's
it's
nothing
just,
you can. I
there's
mean,
nothing you can. It's just so profound. Wow. So, yeah. Well, is there anything about D-Day that in all of your research and taking notes and kind of listening to the vets, that has surprised you or still surprises you, or are you still learning new things about what happened that day and beyond?
I've been going to Normandy since 1977, and every year I learn something new.
Okay.
From whether, it's usually a vet tells me something I hadn't thought of before or didn't know, like, precisely where General Gavin landed. Because that's a location of some dispute.
Oh,
I
okay.
know it because General Gavin showed it to me.
Uh,
I landed here. So that was kind of irrefutable.
mm-hmm.
Other situations where at Omaha Beach, 4 misdropped troops from the 101st fought with the Rangers. They had landed over 20 miles from where they were supposed to. They hid on the beach. When the Rangers landed, they joined them.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was killed there, and the other 3 fought on until the Rangers were relieved on
Mm-hmm.
the 9th of June. Stories like that. Dick Winters and his guys telling us how angry his own people were with him because he made them do things they didn't want to do. They had landed, very early in the morning in St. Mariglis, way off from where they were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Walked overland. You saw this sequence in the Band of Brothers. They had this firefights and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what they didn't tell you is that when they came to this crossroads just before they linked up with the battalion headquarters, they sat down and were exhausted. All their adrenaline had drained.
Mm-hmm.
They were hungry, and they basically just demanded from Winters that they stop for a minute and take a break, which Winters gave them. Winters then walks up the road and he sees where he's at. So he picks the guys up, which they didn't like, and move them to the battalion CP, where he meets up for the first time with the battalion commander, Colonel Strayer, and he's got like 50 people. That's the whole battalion. But his troops, Winters guys, get in the backyard and they sit down and they grab chow and they started eating. And they were getting ready to sleep. I mean, they were kind of bagged out. They had reached the end of their adrenaline flow. And then Winters came up and said, "Hey, get up. We're going to go off and take this battery." Well, where's the battery? Well, nobody knows. It's just out there somewhere. So he takes these, 13 grumbly guys who are not happy with having to go on another operation out to take the battery. Well, unlike the HBO portion, when they take the first gun, they stop. And what do? They get down in the trench, they eat sea rations, they smoke cigarettes, all this stuff's going around about them, but they're whacked. And so they got to take gun number 2, and Winters grabs them and moves them down to take gun number 2. Same thing, smoke,
Eat some more food.
Rations, before the next event.
Yeah, fuel up.
The movie, the battery, they take the battery in about 15 minutes. Well, they started assaulting the battery about 8:30. They didn't leave until 11:30.
Wow.
Those little things. And, you talk to some of the troops, why did they like Winters, or how did they do? Shifty Powers talking about, how he would use his sniping skills and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for fans of Band of Brothers out there, there's a lot of inside information in Colonel Nightingale's book. You've got a great chapter on the Rangers on D-Day, and in fact, you make a point to call out the fact that you wanted to look at the 3 Ranger task forces in isolation, right? You really wanted to kind of go into detail for each task force and what they were doing. You also have your reminiscences of talking to Dick Winters, right?
Yes.
So what about those movements past the beach do you think they were just as critical as, well, storming the beach, yes, but then they had to go further in, right, and then secure certain knockout batteries, but also they had to like secure certain crossroads, certain villages. This was all like a step by step process.
Yeah, it was the whole plan for Normandy was called Overlord. The landing at the beach was Neptune. Well, Overlord required that we had to make a bridgehead so that we could bring in all these million men that Eisenhower had, and then develop sufficient combat power, break out, and then take on the German army. But in order to get to that location, we had to expand the bridgehead. We had to move out to, like in the case of the Brit Beach at Aramash, they had to take the Caen Canal. They had to hold Ranville Ridge. The Canadians had to take Caen because they needed the airfield north of Caen, and the U.S. had to take Cherbourg, which was actually the jewel in the crown. People don't appreciate what Normandy was writ large. It was actually a risk mitigation logistics operation. The reason they picked Normandy was because panzers couldn't operate there very well.
Right.
And so the last thing we wanted was to have a German panzer division run down the beach. So we had to pick areas where they couldn't go, which was Normandy rather than the Pas-de-Calais. That said, We then had to land at Utah to get to Cherbourg. Cherbourg was viewed as the major prize because that was a deep water port.
Mm-hmm.
By using that port, we could ship very quickly from England all these thousands of men and equipment needed to build up the beachhead for the breakout. So we picked Utah to do that, which also meant we had to cut the Cottonton Peninsula.
Yes.
And that required a combination of airborne as well as ground forces.
I'm just going to kind of show that that map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the peninsula is on the left as I see it. Yes, and there's Cherbourg.
Mm-hmm.
So that little piece of ground, about 120 miles, it's not inconsequential, from the Brits at Aramash all the way up to Utah Beach, about 120 kilometers.
Right.
Pretty big piece of space.
Yes.
The whole idea being we had to capture Cherbourg. To do that, we had to capture all the ground essentially between Aramash, Sword Beach, all the way up in a crescent to Cherbourg itself, which we did with a combination of the airborne. The airborne was actually designed to capture inland objectives and secure them, the high ground west of Utah Beach and the high ground north of Omaha and the British sectors. The Ranger objective was not just Point du Hoc. It was inland further to Grand Comp and the big battery at Maisie, which they were aware of. And that would basically be a link between the British beaches on the left and Utah Beach on the right. Just as going back a bit, nobody wanted to take Omaha Beach. They knew it was a tough nut. They could see everything from the imagery, was just something you didn't want to do. But it was something they had to do because they couldn't allow that ground to be occupied by the Germans. That would allow the Germans to defeat Utah Beach or go to the left and beat the Brits on their beaches. So Omaha had to be taken simply as the connective tissue between the primary U.S. beach in Utah and the British beaches further to the east, to the west, excuse me.
Right, because you make the point, and the maps are very helpful for this in the book, that if we hadn't taken Omaha Beach, then the Germans could have, like,
Correct. They could have moved into the Omaha Beach territory and done a flanking movement on either one of the beaches and potentially defeated us in detail, which was unacceptable.
Exactly. Okay.
And on that point, Bradley understood how critical Omaha Beach was. And initially, he did not have the 1st Division penciled in as one of the assault forces. But he started looking at it and he said, I got no choice. I have to have a division I can absolutely depend upon. The 29th was a National Guard unit, was untried in combat.
Yeah.
So he very reluctantly assigned the 1st Division also to Omaha. And there was a near revolt inside the division. They had been to North Africa and Sicily. They thought their time was up for a break. And it became a major discipline problem within the division. But the new division commander, General Hubner, played it very well. And they basically kind of reluctantly said, okay, we understand we got to do this. And now we're going to do it anyway because we have to.
Right.
And they did a superb job. And Bradley made a correct decision in hindsight. The 1st Division and the Rangers covered up the disastrous landing of the 29th Division through no fault of their own.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that worked out.
That worked out. And that's, again, that's just a matter of chance.
Yeah.
If Lieutenant Monteith hadn't taken the left flank, then potentially all of the 1st Division Beach would have been incapable of accepting any troops for the German fire from those positions.
And you also talk about in your chapters on the execution of the plan, the British, you give a little bit on some coverage on the British airborne operations.
Yes, on the 40th and subsequently after that, we spent a lot of time at Pegasus Bridge and Merville Battery. And on the 40th, the British had arranged for us to have the originals at each one of the sites. We had Major Howard at Pegasus Bridge and some of his troops. And at Merville, we had a whole collection. We had General Crookenden, General Hill, and Colonel Otway. Otway responsible for taking Merville Battery. And we had, their soldiers also talking to us. So I got some pretty good information as to how it actually occurred, what the issues were, but more importantly, what the human reactions were at that site at that time. History says, well, they captured the Pegasus Bridge by glider, then great, we secured it, moved on. But you don't get the story of how they did it.
Yeah. Could you share
Howard,
a flavor of that then?
Howard crash lands and he's pushed over to the front of the side of the glider and he can't see anything. It's totally black. And he actually literally thought he was dead. And as Batman grabbed his collar and pulled it back, his helmet had come over his face like that, unbeknownst to him, and kind of knocked him out.
Yeah.
And then later, when they finally captured it, his radio operator said that the major kept beating him over the head with a cleaning rod, saying ham and jam, ham and jam, ham and jam, which was the code that they had secured both bridges. And that was supposed to be transmitted. So the radio operator is sending this Morse out, and Howard is just totally transfixed, and he's beating the guy on the head, saying ham and jam, ham and jam. Finally, the radio operator reaches up and just holds his hand so he can't beat him anymore while he's in the process of transmitting.
Right.
That sort of thing,
That sort of thing. Are there many, just anecdotally, are there many veterans left of D-Day that you're aware of?
No, not really. If you look at it, anybody that was a vet on D-Day was 17, 18 years old.
At the youngest, yeah.
This year we may have 12. If we're lucky, we'll have 12. The Brits will have about an equal number.
Okay.
So, they're virtually all gone. I'm sure there's some alive, but they're not capable of travel, or they're kind of vegetative.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to ask, have you in your experiences there, and then coming back and then like seeing popular representations of D-Day, whether in movies, books, or whatever, is there anything that really stands out to you as like, that seems like the most authentic? Would it be Band of Brothers?
Well, there's several kind of combination of what I was told and what I personally experienced in combat. This opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan lasts for 17 minutes. The truth is, it lasted from 6:30 in the morning till probably 11:30 in the morning. And that's a very authentic reproduction of what actually happened to those people at that moment in time. Veterans who have seen it say, yeah, that was the way it was. So Spielberg really got that right.
Yeah.
The other issue is the final scene in Saving Private Ryan, which is the combat at the bridge. based on what the vet said and what I personally experienced, that's a very authentic reproduction of how that stuff actually happens.
I see. Okay. Okay. Is there any book that you have read that is the most comprehensive? Or, I mean, obviously,
There's tons of books
there's
on
a million
D-Day.
of them.
The Bible that I really think is probably the most solid all around is Stephen Ambrose's book, D-Day. It very accurately depicts the industrial strength and management skills, but also the human side of what actually occurred on there. His depiction of the timeline at Omaha Beach and, who saw what and what occurred. Very good. The same with the airborne side. On the airborne side of the house, SLA Marshall's Night Drop is very good also. He wrote that book based on his own oral transcriptions of the originals on the site immediately after Normandy. He interviewed all of the 82nd and 101st troops in England, and that was the basis of his book. So it's quite good and quite comprehensive as to that. The rest of the books are, it's just a matter of pick what you like and what's readable. Hastings' book. There are other books written by some veterans. Gavin's book, On to Berlin, is excellent.
Okay.
His journal, which was recently published by his daughter, Chloe, is an excellent description behind the scenes of what was going on. The chaos, the confusion. I'm speaking of, back in April of 1944, all the things they had to go through, the changes, the decisions, the bad decisions, and then the corrections, and his evaluation of the officers underneath him and their various competencies or lack thereof. It's a great book to understand behind the scenes what these guys had to deal with that you don't read about in the normal history book.
Oh, well, fantastic. I'll be looking that up because I eat this stuff up. And yeah, thank you for these recommendations for my viewers. And let's see. So you're heading out on Monday, and I know we're gonna have to probably wrap up our interview here, but is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't covered? And all I can say is I recommend Colonel Nightingale's book. Everyone check this out. It's from Casemate Publishing, The Human Face of D-Day. It's a wonderful collection of personal, historical. You kind of got a mashup of, military history, tactics, you've got logistics, you've got personal stories, you've got your own stories, and it's just got a little bit of everything. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you for writing it, first of all.
Well, I felt I had to do it before I died. It was a requirement that I tasked myself with.
Yeah.
To answer your question in a broader sense, war, one of the things I was very clear in talking to the vets was war was intensely personal and impersonal. War as a whole is very impersonal, but when you're immersed in it, it's highly personal. And they all had this there was no bravado in talking to these guys. There was no, well, how wonderful I was and all that. Never like that at all. Very humble, very prideful that they were part of this thing. As I said, when they first time they saw that mass of ships and planes, they understood for the first time what they were part of. And it gave them an incredible sense of courage and optimism that they were going to win. And it made a huge difference mentally to every one of those guys that landed in the beach or jumped out of an airplane. They were very mindful of the troops that didn't come back. They always talked about Bill or Fred or Ted, and he was killed right next to me, or we were together, and all of a sudden a mortar round landed and he was gone. And and they're just kind of shell shocked by that 40 years later.
The suddenness of it.
Overall, it was a spirit. They had an individual spirit of purpose in what they did, but it was also they understood the magnitude of what they were doing for everybody else. They knew that they were part of something much larger than themselves, and they didn't mind the slaughter that took place, the casualties that took place. They minded, yes, but they understood it was a price they had to pay, and they didn't mind paying it.
Right.
It would be unique today. Get an 18-year-old in your downtown and put him in that situation. Would he be prepared to do that?
Well, that's one of the concerns I have. I follow a lot of the different news around the military. Obviously, I'm still very interested in what's happening. And you mentioned the how many ships does the Navy have today? It's really startling how we have kind of downsized to the point where it's alarming if people who are in the know or are even curious to know what our military our levels are at.
We have a tremendous problem with our industrial base today. You just look at what's happening in the Ukraine. We don't produce in a week the number of 155 shells the Ukrainians shoot in a day. And we're worried about Indo-Pacific, our own issues. Where does this stuff come from? Our industrial base is grossly different from what it was in World War II. And it's much more delicate now. The missiles, computer chips, and all those things that take 2 years to make, we spend in half a minute. Carney shooting down all those missiles and drones from Iran probably fired a year's worth of weaponry in terms of manufacturing capacity.
Wow. Yeah. So I think for me, just looking back at D-Day, it's a way to remember that you have to kind of always be on alert, no matter what the era is. I was listening to a show about the Ukrainian war right now, and people said, "Oh, we had no idea that these type of wars could still be fought. We just figured now everything's nuclear. There's going to be no more wars." And it's like, look, this is actually a ground war happening in 2024. Tanks are still being used. It's like we haven't really moved that far beyond, what happened.
Well, in a sense, the nuclear warhead has condemned us to conventional war.
No, right.
Nobody wants to use the nukes except maybe Putin, and I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Everybody's forced to fight these existential battles like we did in World War I or World War II.
Right. Yeah, so ironically, the nuclear the nuclear warheads kind of keep us stuck in the past.
So which means we now actually have to spend people on the battlefield.
Right. And it circles back around to your thought about the 18-year-old in America today. Would they be able to do what we did back in 1944?
Well, they were children of the Depression. Going into the Army meant 3 square meals a day and a shelter over their head.
Right.
Vast improvement from what they had come from.
Yeah.
Well, take an 18-year-old today and put him at Fort Moore or Fort Liberty, and put on his helmet and his rifle and put him on out in the dirt and see how he would feel or do about the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know how well that would go. You
Well,
take
we may
their
find
smartphone
out.
away and they're freaking out.
Normandy is, like, going back to your original point. Normandy is sort of what our nation and our civilization is all about. It's ideals and principles and clearly right and wrong. There's no amorphous grays or contradictions. It's very simple.
Yes.
We were there because the issue was very simple, wasn't complex. We knew we had to do it. We knew it was going to cost lives, but we went ahead and did it as the price of being what we are. It's like that woman told me at the screen door.
Yes.
It's the price of what we are.
That's the price of what we are. Well, on that note, I think that that kind of sums up everything I wanted to cover with you today, and just to remember again the sacrifice, the courage, the men who gave it their all, those who came back, those who didn't, and I just wish you a very safe trip, safe travels, and I hope all goes well for the 80th anniversary celebrations. I'll be watching. I'll try to find a French channel somewhere. I don't know.
Well, just remember, it's all about people. It's not about things, and it's not about organizations. It always boils down to individuals doing extraordinary things. And that's what we're all about. That's how the nation grew. Whether it's somebody discovering Pikes Peak or, whatever, it's an individual that makes us all a lot better.
Oh, I
And
couldn't agree more.
makes that better than Normandy.
I couldn't agree more. We had excellent people up and down that beach who were there for excellent reasons. So yeah,
Nobody was in it for the loot.
Who did?
Said nobody was in it for the loot.
Yeah, there was no loot. Yeah. No, that was the apotheosis of, like, just self-sacrifice. That in the dictionary, self-sacrifice, Normandy. That's the definition.
Just look at the cemetery. That tells it all.
Very true. Very true. Well, thank you for joining me here today, Keith, on the History Shelf for this interview. And we hope to have you back on again. Do you plan on writing any more books?
I'm actually writing 2.
Oh, tell me.
I got to keep it going. If I quit writing, then I'm going to die. So I use it to keep my juices flowing.
Well, you have to keep me in the loop on that, and I would love to have you back on the show.
I'll send you my draft. You can be my critique.
I would, yes, thank you. And yes, you've done that before
I know
too.
you don't have enough to read.
No, I know, I've got, but I make time for these things because I just love it. I love reading these stories and our history and our fighting men and women. It's just all about it.
I just hope your viewers think a little bit about this and maybe self-reflect on what we're all about. That in my mind is what Normandy is all about. It's what we're all about. It's not French, it's us.
It's us. That's right. It is. And absolutely, that is my goal of just doing a bunch of different things in June for the 80th anniversary and having you on. I do want everyone who's watching this to really just take a moment and think about it. Pick up a book, pick up Keith's book, pick up any of these books that he's mentioned, or just read into it and understand just the monumental scale of what happened. And like you said, it was a battle for civilization. I love how you put it that way. And we didn't lose.
We didn't lose.
We didn't lose, thank goodness. All right. Well, thanks, Keith, for joining me here, and we'll see you again on this channel. I know it.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
You are welcome. Thank you.